Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a question that's probably on a lot of your minds when you see new ideas in education. How solid is the research behind it?
Right.
We've got this 1994 article, Increasing the Quality of Educational Intervention Research by Michael Presley and Karen Harris as our guide today.
A classic, really.
Yeah, think of this as like your personal toolkit for navigating educational studies, helping you spot potential shaky ground, and understand what actually makes for strong evidence.
Exactly. Whether you're implementing interventions, interpreting research, or just, well, curious.
Right. Whether you're putting new teaching methods into practice, trying to decipher research findings, or just have a healthy skepticism, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Absolutely. That article, even though it's from 94, it still hits on some really crucial points.
Yeah.
Presley and Harris, they were active researchers themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and they took a really critical look at how experimental studies in education were being done. And what they found was that even in the journals we tend to trust the most, some surprisingly fundamental flaws kept popping up,
Mm-hmm.
in how research was designed and carried out.
Okay, let's unpack this. So even if a study makes it through peer review, gets published in a good journal, you're saying there could still be some pretty significant issues. What kind of things were they seeing?
Well, they really focused on a few key areas where problems tended to crop up. First, frequent issues with what researchers call internal and external validity.
Okay, validity. Break that down for
Sure.
us.
So internal validity is basically about whether the study actually shows that the thing they tested, the intervention, is what caused the result they saw, and
Yeah,
not something else.
right, ruling out other explanations.
Exactly. And then external validity is about whether those results would likely hold true in other, real-world situations outside the lab, basically.
So give us some real-world examples of where internal validity might go wrong. What kind of errors were they actually finding in published studies?
Yeah, the article points to several reviews, um, specifically on teaching reading comprehension. For instance, a study by Lysinchik and colleagues looked at research with elementary students and found what they called classic internal validity errors.
Okay, like what?
Often it involved confoundings. That's just a fancy way of saying there were other differences between the groups besides the teaching method being tested.
Ah, okay.
So if one group got a new reading program and also had much smaller class sizes, let's
What?
say,
Right.
and they did better on a reading test, you wouldn't know if it was the new program or the smaller classes that made the difference. They're mixed up or confounded.
Got it. That makes sense.
They also saw a lot of one classroom, one treatment designs. So like trying a new method in just one classroom and comparing it to a different method in another single classroom.
Yeah, that seems tricky.
It's really tough to say if any differences you see are because of the methods or just the unique mix of students and the teacher in those specific rooms. And similar issues popped up in research with older students and even in studies looking at the whole language approach.
That idea of confounding seems really critical then. Can you maybe paint an even clearer picture, like another example of how it could really mess things up?
Sure. Imagine a study comparing a new textbook to an old one. Okay.
Okay.
But the teachers using the new textbook also received, say, a whole day of special training on how to use it effectively.
Ah,
Well, the teachers using the old textbook got no extra support, just handed the book.
right?
Now, if the students using the new book do better, is it because the book is better or because their teachers were just better prepared?
You can't tell.
You can't tell
Yep.
because the textbook and the teacher training are confounded.
Mm-hmm.
The headline finding might be totally misleading, like saying a new diet works when people on it also started exercising daily.
Right, right. That's a great analogy. So how can researchers try to avoid falling into those kinds of traps?
Well, it really comes down to careful planning right from the start. The article really emphasizes this. Yeah, they even mention that in many scientific fields, experts spend a huge amount of time just in the planning stages
Huh.
and pilot testing, like trying out a smaller version of the study first that can be incredibly valuable for spotting potential confoundings before you commit to a full-scale investigation.
So like a dress rehearsal.
Kinda, yeah. And then once the study is running, it's crucial to keep a close eye on what's actually happening to catch any unexpected issues.
Okay.
And if a serious confounding does pop up, the authors suggest that follow-up studies are essential to either fix the problem or at least figure out how much impact it had.
And what about the other side of the coin? External validity. How are studies sometimes falling short there in terms of being relevant to actual classrooms?
Yeah, the main concern here was that some studies created such, well, artificial environments that it was hard to know if the findings would apply in typical school settings.
Artificial how?
Well, the article gives examples like using made-up words, nonsense syllables to study vocabulary learning, instead of real words students actually use.
Mhm.
Or doing reading interventions with students pulled out into special quiet groups rather than working within their regular, sometimes chaotic classroom routines.
Right.
These controlled conditions, they can be good for isolating specific effects, that internal validity piece.
Mm-hmm.
But you lose that sense of whether the method would actually be practical or effective in the messy reality of a classroom.
So it's a bit of a tightrope walk, isn't it? You need enough control to be sure about your cause and effect, that internal validity.
Right.
But you also need enough connection to the real world so your findings are actually useful for teachers, that external validity.
Exactly. It's a balance. The article even quotes an anonymous journal reviewer who argued for the value of longer studies of real content in real classrooms, even if those studies might be a bit messier to conduct.
Interesting. So embracing the messiness sometimes.
Yeah, because those messier real-world studies often give us insights that are more directly applicable in practice.
Okay, moving on. The next area Presley and Harris looked at was non-credible conditions and comparisons. What exactly does that involve?
So this has to do with how the different groups in a study are set up, particularly the control or comparison groups.
Okay.
The authors and the experts they surveyed felt there was this tendency to rely too much on what they called straw man comparisons.
As straw man, what does that mean here?
It happens when researchers put a ton of effort into making their preferred new teaching method look as good as possible. Best materials, extra training, everything.
Uh-huh.
But they don't put that same level of care into making sure the comparison method is a fair or realistic representation of other approaches.
Ah, so it's like setting up a race where one runner gets brand new shoes and a personal trainer
Exactly.
while the other is wearing flip-flops and hasn't stretched.
Precisely. You're almost setting the comparison up to fail from the start.
That doesn't seem very fair or useful.
No, not if you really want to get a sense of how different methods truly stack up. To do that, you need credible comparisons. The article suggests researchers should even reach out to the people who originally developed the comparison methods to make sure they're being implemented correctly. But the experts surveyed felt that this kind of consultation, well, it rarely happens.
And why is it so important to have these well-designed comparison groups? Isn't the goal just to see if the new thing works?
Well, yes and no. The goal of educational research shouldn't just be to declare one method the undisputed winner.
Okay.
As the article points out, different approaches likely have different strengths and weaknesses, right? Some might work better for certain students or in certain contexts than others.
That makes sense.
So the idea is to really map out those strengths and weaknesses rather than just trying to win a head-to-head horse
Let's
race.
get a more nuanced picture.
Exactly. Credible comparisons, the authors argue, should not only reflect how the different methods are actually intended to be used in the real world, that's the external validity part again, but they should also minimize any differences between the groups that aren't directly related to the teaching methods themselves. And that brings us right back to internal validity.
Yeah.
Trying to keep things comparable.
Got it. Okay, let's shift gears to statistical design and analyses. What were the main concerns Presley and Harris raised in that area?
One key issue was the difference between planning your statistical analyses in advance versus doing them ad hoc, after you've already collected and looked at your data.
Okay, plan versus ad hoc. Why does that matter?
Well, the best practice is to have a clear plan for how you're going to analyze your results before you even start collecting data, and then stick to that plan.
Right.
The worry is that if researchers don't do this, they might be tempted, maybe subconsciously even, to try different statistical tests after seeing the results, and then maybe choose the ones that happen to show their preferred teaching method in a positive light, even if those aren't the most appropriate methods for the data they have.
So ad hoc just means deciding how to analyze the data after you've already seen the results, which could be a bit risky.
Exactly. It sounds like it could really lead to some biased interpretations of the findings.
It absolutely can. The article gives this hypothetical example where researchers might get non-significant results with standard statistical tests.
Okay.
But then maybe they switch to a different type of test or selectively group students in a certain way, and suddenly the results look significant and supportive of their method.
Ah, kind of like data dredging.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of sifting through the data until you find something that looks good can lead to conclusions that aren't really reliable.
Okay. The article also brings up the concept of power in statistical analysis. What does that mean in this context, and why was it a concern?
Right, power. Statistical power is basically the ability of a study to detect a real effect if one actually exists. Think of it like having enough light to see a small object in a dark room. If you don't have enough light, which is power, you might miss seeing it even if it's there, a real effect.
Gotcha.
The article highlights two main problems related to power. One is conducting studies with very large numbers of participants. That can sometimes make even tiny, practically insignificant effects come out as statistically significant. You have so much power, you detect everything.
Interesting. Too much power.
Yeah, potentially detecting effects that don't really matter in the real world. But the other, and probably more common problem, is underpowered studies.
Okay, not enough power.
Right. Studies that don't have enough participants to have a reasonable chance of detecting effects that are actually meaningful in an educational sense.
So a really effective teaching method might look like it doesn't work just because the study didn't include enough students.
Exactly. That's the risk. The authors express concern because there's actually quite a bit of established guidance out there on how to design studies with enough power to detect meaningful effects. They mentioned Jacob Cohen's work. He was a real leader here.
Mm-hmm.
The issue is that researchers sometimes only think about power after they've already done the study and analyzed the data.
Oh.
Yeah, maybe using it to explain away why they didn't find an effect they were hoping for, or to dismiss an unexpected finding. But really, power is something that needs careful consideration right at the beginning when you're designing the study.
That makes sense. Plan for it up front. Okay, the final major area that Presley and Harris discuss is how research findings are represented to consumers. So, how the results get communicated. What were the main problems they saw there?
Yeah, this really comes down to transparency and accuracy in reporting and interpretation. One issue is that sometimes research reports just don't include enough detail.
Like how?
Not enough detail about how the study was done or what the actual results were, which makes it really difficult for other people, other researchers, educators, policymakers to judge the quality of the findings.
Right, you can't evaluate it properly.
Exactly. And sometimes the conclusions the researchers draw in their papers don't really logically follow from the data they collected or the way they designed the study. And other times, researchers might present their findings without even mentioning other studies that have found different results or offer alternative explanations, kind of ignoring conflicting evidence.
It sounds like there can be a lack of openness and maybe even some bias, conscious or not, in how research gets presented.
Precisely. The article also talks about hyperbole.
Hyperbole.
Yeah, exaggerating the findings beyond what the data actually show. For example, a study might find a small improvement in reading scores for, say, some students using a new program.
Okay.
But the researchers might then claim that the program leads to 2 years of reading growth for all students. You know, a big overstatement.
Right, stretching the truth.
Or if a study is done with a very specific group of students, say boys in private schools, you can't necessarily claim that the same results will hold true for all students everywhere, like girls in large public schools.
Yeah.
As one of the experts they surveyed put it, there needs to be truth in advertising when it comes to educational interventions.
That makes perfect sense. Truth in advertising. And what about when other researchers try to repeat a study, replicate it, and can't get the same results? How is it usually handled, according to Presley and Harris?
Well, the experts in their survey largely agreed that when a study's findings can't be replicated, the original researchers often tend to, well, ignore those failures to replicate.
Really? Just to ignore them?
Or sometimes they might argue that the replication study wasn't conducted properly, which, you know, can be a valid point sometimes.
Sure.
But the article emphasizes that if a replication attempt is well designed and carefully carried out, but still doesn't find the same results, it should be taken very seriously.
So don't just dismiss it.
Right. Instead of just dismissing it, the authors urge researchers to try to understand why the results might be different.
Okay, how?
This could involve looking at whether the effects of the teaching method depend on specific characteristics of the students, what they call aptitude treatment interactions, or maybe the learning environment, setting treatment interactions. Figuring out these nuances, these conditions under which something works or doesn't work, can actually be a really valuable contribution. It helps refine our understanding.
So failures to replicate aren't just failures, they're learning opportunities.
Exactly. They tell us about the specificity of the treatment effect.
Okay, so after highlighting all these potential problems, the article does offer some concrete suggestions for what individual researchers can do to improve the quality of their work, right? What are some of the key actions they recommend?
Absolutely. They have a table, Table I, that provides a really helpful summary. A dozen practical steps. And many of them reinforce the points we've already discussed. They stress the importance of really thorough planning, doing those pilot studies to try and identify and fix potential confoundings early on.
Right, the planning piece again.
Yeah. And if a significant confounding does slip through into the main study, they recommend doing follow-up research to address it, rather than just publishing potentially flawed results.
Makes sense.
They also emphasize maximizing what they call ecological validity, making sure the study conditions are as close to real-world educational settings as possible.
That ecological validity, basically, how well does a lab study translate to a real classroom?
Spot on. That's the essence of it.
What else made their list of recommendations?
Well, they highlight the importance of researchers having a deep understanding of all the teaching methods being compared in their study, including any control or comparison methods, not just their favorite one.
Okay. Know the whole field.
Yeah, and they even suggest seeking out external expertise if needed to make sure all the methods are being implemented correctly.
Good point.
And speaking of implementation, the stress-checking treatment fidelity.
Fidelity.
Yeah, it just means making sure the teaching method was actually used the way it was supposed to be in the study. Did they follow the protocol?
Ah, okay. Check that it was done right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The article also reiterates the idea of designing studies to really understand the specific strengths and weaknesses of different approaches, rather than just that horse race idea.
It's a mapping, not just winning.
Right. Planning the statistical analyses in advance, making sure the study has enough statistical power. Those are key recommendations, too.
Stats, planning, and power. Got it.
And finally, when it comes to sharing their work, they urge researchers to write up results fully and promptly. Don't leave stuff out.
Transparency.
Yes. And don't ignore any data that doesn't fit your expected pattern. Make sure any claims you make are strictly supported by your data.
No hyperbole.
No hyperbole. And take replication attempts seriously. Don't just brush them off.
It sounds like overall a call for more rigor, more transparency, and maybe a more nuanced way of thinking about how we study what works in education.
Precisely. That sums it up well. Presley and Harris conclude by acknowledging that, many researchers with solid training already understand these principles.
Yeah.
Their hope was that by clearly laying out these potential pitfalls and offering concrete steps for improvement, they could encourage an even greater commitment across the field to conducting really high-quality educational intervention research.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive. I mean, it touches on something so important for anyone involved in education, or frankly, anyone just trying to understand the evidence behind different learning approaches.
Yeah.
It's easy to assume that published research is always rock solid, isn't it? But this article is such a valuable reminder that we need to be thoughtful and critical consumers.
Agreed. And while Presley and Harris were primarily writing to researchers, the issues they raise have really important implications for anyone who comes across claims about the effectiveness of educational programs or methods, teachers, parents, administrators.
Absolutely. So, as you, our listener, think about everything we've discussed today, maybe consider this. Given these potential weaknesses that can exist, even in published educational research, how should you approach evaluating the educational claims and findings you encounter in your own life, in your work?
Good question.
What are the key questions you should be asking about the research that supposedly backs up those claims? That's something to really think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.